We're live-ish. Getting there. Good. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you for joining us here on the live call. For those of you who are on the call, I'm popping you on mute now. And for those of you who are joining us on the live on Facebook, welcome to you as well. We're in a series, we're talking about the truth expansion, the natural ascension of consciousness that comes with a poised and sovereign life. And specifically over the course of these weeks, we are discussing the subtle obstructions that are structured somewhere in your blind spot, somewhere outside of your line of vision, some obstructions that have been constructed or inherited over the course of your life. And they influence the way that this creative essence shows up in our life's experiences. So in context of the truth expansion, we are saying that this is a spiritual phenomenon that is happening now on this planet in the collective consciousness, and that it is causing an expansion or magnification of all energies that are held inside your framework of existence and all others. And we're saying that you have the sovereign mastery to be able to participate in that expansion in the way that brings you closer and truer into congruence with your life, into union with your life, so that you actually experience a much more graceful, miraculous, and magic story of being alive on the planet. And we're discussing now, in order for you to really sink into that mastery and really grasp it, how to be in the world but not of the world, how to truly live an awakened and enlightened experience of constant expansion and creativity. And so to do that, we're looking at the subtle obstructions that prevent you from that experience. Yes? That's what we're talking about. That's what this whole series about, is what are those subtle obstructions that influence the way the truth expansion is happening through you anyway. And today we're specifically doing a little mindset puzzle, a little thought exercise around the difference between humility and vulnerability. These are two concepts that are commonly confused, and they're thrown around in the self-help industry a lot. And anyone who's familiar with any kind of inner work or spiritual work, you'll know the words vulnerability and humility. And you'll have been told a million times to be vulnerable, to be humble. And sometimes you get this right. And if you get it right, it changes the way that you listen and respond to the world. And you're open and available for incredible miracle and the wild surge in life force energy that sort of moves through you and lifts the burden of whatever it is you're going through and clarifies the mind and your emotional field and clears the path ahead so that everything you put your hands to has positive results. And that every decision that you make in some way cultivate and nurtures the kingdom of heaven. That's what happens when you get humility and vulnerability right. But if you get humility and vulnerability wrong, for example, if you confuse them for each other, then what you end up doing is presenting your weaknesses to the world for it to scrutinize and either sympathize with or reject or deny. And then you find the world poking at your wounds because you insist on learning through suffering. So what we have to do is shift some of the definitions that we have around vulnerability and humility, shift them around in our mindset, our psychoneurosomatic vibrational world. Your mindset is more than your attitude. It's more than having a positive thinking attitude. It's more than that. It's fundamentally how your entire mind is set, including the coordinates of thought and the coordinates of feeling and your habitual movements in the manifest world. So we have to shift some of those coordinates around the words vulnerability and humility so that you can be humble before God, not humiliated by the world. So that you can be vulnerable to the truth, but not vulnerable to attack. So your job today is to follow along, To follow. You don't have to pick up any of the concepts I give you. You don't have to change your entire life, but follow along and understand the frequency and the angle that I'm giving you. And you'll find that if you can attune your mindset, if you can tune your thinking around these two words, you will open up for tremendous results. Ready? Let me see. If you're on the live call, give me a thumbs up or a nod so I see that we're ready. Good. Good, wonderful. By the way, if you attend these live calls every Monday at 2 o'clock, then you're here live in the frequency and you get to bring your questions at the end. So you're also going to influence these teachings. And then in the Oasis, which is our incubator / training ground for sovereign mind, we'll go deeper with these concepts tomorrow and we'll practice a mindset protocol and an energy protocol that's going to help to really solidify this in your consciousness. Right, here we go. Okay, last week we covered comfort zone. We talked about the vibrational universe of our experience. And we say that we understand that with phenomenology, we are saying that everything we create, we are creating entirely, or everything we experience is entirely as a result of our projection into quantum possibility. That's phenomenology. And ontology says that life is always becoming, always expanding. So if we put those two things on top of each other, we're saying that our comfort zone is that point of those coordinates of consciousness through which we are constantly expanding and recreating our life through that. So that means that your comfort zone is the vibrational universe of our experience. That's what we talked about last week. And the glitch there is that we often believe that this zone is what reality is. And that has us creatively outlining for success within that vision. Do you understand that? Give me a nod or a thumbs up. Yes. Good, good, good. Thank you. Good. Right. So we're creatively outlining for success within that vibrational universe of what we understand reality to be. And because we do that, because we creatively outline inside that vision, we recreate from the past, we minimize the possibility for unimaginable, mind-blowing miracles. So we are teaching, at Sovereign Masters, we are teaching how to soften the edges of that comfort zone, not to try to bust out of your comfort zone, because you'll just trigger the opposite reaction in resistance, because every action has an equal and opposite reaction. So when you try and bust out of your comfort zone and go and prove the world wrong or whatever it is, what you're doing is then initiating an equal and opposite resistance. So instead, we teach how to alchemize the edges of that comfort zone so that you're sort of living in an instant now. And those of you who are in the Oasis, some of you are on the call. Hello, it's good to have you. You will remember the model that we've discussed up to now that shows what a comfort zone of expansive opportunity looks like. So to build on that teaching, and let us know if you need the replay. So if you missed last week's free teaching called Expanding Your Comfort Zone, let us know, let Matt know, and he'll send you the replay from that. So to build on that, right, we're talking about alchemizing our comfort zone here. We're going to now look at how humility and vulnerability play their part in either alchemizing that comfort zone or solidifying it, right? Solidifying your comfort zone. This is the universe. This is the world that I live in. And this is the point from which I will continue to create. So we have to look at these two frequencies in turn. They're very similar. Humility and vulnerability are similar, but they are different parts of your overall consciousness. They're different parts of your mechanism. They're different parts of the mechanism of your being. So if you understand them better, then you'll use them better. Yes? We'll start with vulnerability. Okay, just checking the heads, looking at the people, good. Starting with vulnerability. For example, if you are a crystal glass, then you are vulnerable. You are exquisite. You have a high frequency. You are the perfect container. You are fit for purpose. You are living your truth, and you have a known vulnerability. If the resonance increases through this structure too fast, or there's too much pressure or resistance at any given point, then you will shatter. So you have an innate vulnerability. And it's the same for everyone. It's the same for absolutely everybody. Now, true vulnerability, the sort of vulnerability that I'm speaking of here, isn't any particular manifest disadvantage you have. It isn't a disability or an addiction or a codependency or something that you weren't privileged enough to be born with. It's not, I'm vulnerable because I have this hardship. That's not vulnerability. True vulnerability is innate to your consciousness. It's a part of being human. The problem is how we relate to that. And we can get a clue about what the problem is based on how we've defined it in the dictionary. So just remember, just because it's in the dictionary does not mean that that's the true definition, because we are the people who put that definition in the dictionary. So if we've got it wrong, it's wrong in the dictionary. So in the dictionary, it says, vulnerability is the quality or state of being exposed to the possibility of being attacked or harmed, either physically or emotionally. That's how we've written it down in the dictionary, we the people. We make a mistake, you see, when we say, it's good to be vulnerable. I want to be vulnerable. That in itself is not the mistake. The mistake is then in the erroneous definition. We say, I want to be vulnerable. I want to be open and available to the possibility. And so we go out with our open wounds to prove ourselves willing to expose ourselves to attack. Are you following me here? So we go out with our wounds and we say, I am vulnerable. Now, we understand the good intention here. We understand that by being vulnerable, we are at least not building walls. We are not building separation, right? We get that. We get that we are wanting to be vulnerable. But the glitch is in letting our idea of a manifest vulnerability lead our interaction into and through the world, into and with the world. Do you understand that? I am leading with my idea of a manifest vulnerability, and I'm leading with that as I go into the world to relate with the world. Like, to be facetious, like, I'm coming to you vulnerable with my open heart bleeding, and I am wondering why love hurts. We're coming together now for a family season. It's coming in. The family season is coming in. And that often brings all kinds of dynamics together. We have different ways of being. We have different ways of seeing, different ways of listening, different values. And all of these differences are colliding. They're all colliding. And so you are allowed in that environmental weather to protect your vulnerable mind, your vulnerable energy field, your vulnerable body, and your vulnerable family relationships. And if you need to go back and look at the teaching we did a few weeks ago called Vaccine or No Vaccine, How to Know and Be Sovereign in Your Knowing, go back to that to remind yourself of how you do hold that sovereign poise even in your vulnerability, because you're not supposed to go out into the world with your heart bleeding, exposing yourself willingly to attack. That's not helpful to you in your life, and it's not helpful to the world, which needs you at your best. True vulnerability is not vulnerability toward the world. Here are my open wounds. True vulnerability is to the moment, poised, living in a purgatorial state between what's past and what's yet to come. Open creatively in a strange world where creative imagination can modify your soul's spiritual genes. Yes, where creative imagination can modify the framework of your consciousness like that, reforming its reality in the flash of an idea. That's vulnerability, that in-between state. It's a very real place, this purgatory, and it's woven into the now moment in a magical dimension of poise, that never-ending nanosecond between today and tomorrow, right there at midnight. That's true vulnerability, living in the poised moment of now, knowing that at any moment, your quantum reality can collapse and it can become new at the flick of a choice. At any moment now, a decision that you make, a perspective that you choose, a word that you say, an energy bubble from the outside, perhaps, can come in and collapse the quantum declaration that I'm making about the life that I'm living. And in a moment, I can find myself in hell. That's vulnerability. And that's innate. That's innate to you. And it's got nothing to do with your disadvantages. At any moment, your quantum reality can collapse and become the experience of hell. And at any moment, your quantum reality can collapse and become the kingdom of heaven, making unimaginable things possible for you. I want to read a text from one of my clients. Get it up. All right. This is from Laurie. And she wrote, "What you've done for me is lovely. I feel a bubble around me that stops the negativity from people, especially those I don't know and who don't know me. It's such a beautiful feeling knowing they can't harm me and they can't get in my head. I feel untouchable. Thank you so much for this gift." Isn't that lovely? Isn't that lovely? Now, this doesn't mean that she's not vulnerable. This means she's not vulnerable to the world. It means that this awful woman in her office can't make her feel like crap anymore. It means that her day is no longer ruined by other people. The potentiality is not vulnerable to collapse by forces out there, which makes it more vulnerable to collapse into truth. Yes. If your vulnerable state of poise, if your ability to shatter at any given moment is not vulnerable to the world, that means it's more available to the divine. It means there's more availability in your vulnerability to the divine. Collapse into truth. You don't want to be vulnerable to the world, but always available for your container to shatter if there is a miracle coming that doesn't fit in it. That's why we say to be vulnerable, not to go into the world with our wounds, but to be open to the possibility to collapse our vibrational universe at any given moment and allow something new to form. So now let's talk about humility. If you know that you are a crystal glass and you honor this innate vulnerability in your very being, and you know that this innate vulnerability does prevent you from being and doing and having everything on your own, then you are humble. That's humility. So that is to say, I am in my own life and I am aware of my vulnerability, not my disadvantages, but my innate nature of being constantly exposed to the possibility of choice between good and evil. At any time, I can collapse my poise and be living in a net energy negative life story. Yes, that's what hell is, right? That's entropy, that's spiritual entropy, net energy negative life story. At any moment, I can be brought into illusion and I can make declarations about what is and what isn't. And I can project story and then I can recreate from the feedback of that story. I can do that at any moment. And if I know that vulnerability, then I am humble. That vulnerability is there whether I know it or not. But knowing it and honoring it, that is being humble. And because I am humble to this truth, my heart and my mind are open, but my guard is peaked and my awareness is trained to know how to move in the world that contains threats against my vulnerability. If you're a glass crystal, don't get a job at the rodeo, or at least wear an appropriate helmet. But I want to stretch the boundaries of what's possible, and I want to prove to them that I can be and do and have anything I want. So charge into scenarios and life conversations, displaying all your vulnerabilities in an attempt to orchestrate an outcome. That's not humble, that's prideful. True humility is knowing that your innate vulnerability makes it impossible for you to orchestrate anything on your own. That you are 100% at the mercy of unknown energy systems and dynamics that you'll never be able to grasp. There are all kinds of people that you are in relation with. People and systems and stars positions and the moon position and all of the things in the universe, all of the things in manifest form that you are at the mercy of. You don't have to grasp all these things. That's what it comes down to is if you know your vulnerability and you accept your vulnerability and you can stand in humility in relation to that, and you can own that you do live in this world of poise that can go either way. If you know that and you stand in that, now you're at the mercy of a different kind of energy system. Because with that humility, you're able to place your frame of consciousness inside a body of grace that does all that heavy lifting for you, so that you don't have to grasp all the different energy systems, all the personality types of all the people you interact with, all the masteries of the world. Being vulnerable and humble at the same time, overlaying these two aspects of your consciousness, that allows for an incredible transformation. Over the last few years, my husband and I have gone on a tremendous journey of discovery, of spiritual discovery through life, through the lived experience. And we've learned the difference between being humble and being vulnerable. And we've come to honor both. We've experienced what it's like to lose everything and then rebuild everything with a great attitude and then lose it all again. We've lived in a castle, we've lived in a barn, we lived in a mansion, we've lived in a tent. And we've needed the help of ordinary and extraordinary people the whole way, from food donations to clothes, ideas and opportunities, patience and grace. And after 11 years of this pattern, Matt and I realized one day, not too far from here, that we had run out of fuel and we'd run out of water and we'd run out of money at the same time. And running out of water was the low point. Because, you know, they say, if you have had to carry your own water, you've learned the value of every single drop. So can you imagine the humility when you know that you have learned to carry the water, when you know that you've learned that you needed to wash your hair in the stream because that's the only running water available, when you've had to pump water out of a mountain spring and then carry it up a mountain in order to do the dishes, and you still manage to find yourself having run out of water. Why are some patterns so hard to transcend? How could we have let this happen? For all our inner work and for all our mastery, we could not transcend this pattern of loss and rebuild, loss and rebuild, loss and rebuild. How can we transcend this pattern? Transpose this into your own life now. What is this pattern in your own life that you have not transcended? For all of your mastery, for all of your grace, there is no single missing piece that is going to solve this puzzle. Every time we tried to transcend that pattern, every time we got close, oh, look, we've manifested a mansion all of a sudden. We were living in a barn and now we're living in a mansion. It's finally over. We finally transcended it. But then our innate vulnerability would collapse us back into the world that we once knew. It's like being at the edge of that comfort zone, saying, I'm ready to leap through that comfort zone. And you activate the exact same equal and opposite response from life. So I stood by the water machine that day when my husband and I realized that we'd run out of everything again. I stood by the water machine looking at the coins in my hand, just hopeless. Hopeless. How are we here again? How are we here now again? And I looked up and I saw 3 pelicans flying overhead. 3 pelicans. And something occurred inside of me. It was a silent groan. It was a silent, deep, primal groan, a plea for mercy. And I said to the pelicans, send help. Now, the next day at church, so off they flew. Ah, they went. The next day at church, I heard the same messages as always, but I heard them differently because I had been vulnerable and humble at the same time. I had stood in the truth of that vulnerability with the humbleness that allowed me to completely give everything up, to surrender it all, to let go of every single investment in outcome. I know I am vulnerable, so I know I need you. That's the missing piece so often, isn't it? You say, I'm vulnerable, so I'm going to go into this family situation. I'm going to be willing to be vulnerable, so I'm going to confront the source of my frustration, like my client, Laurie, who knew she had to go into the office and meet with this person day after day. But to be humble enough to know that there is nothing that I can do to get out of that vulnerability because it is innate. So I must have the protection of grace. I must have an intercession field of consciousness. I must have a savior. And when I got these things together, when these things clicked for me, my entire frame of consciousness slid into the embrace of Christ. And from that moment on, everything changed for us. That pattern dissolved the very next day. The very next day, we were delivered in ways I haven't even figured out how to talk about yet, but we were delivered immediately from that financial pattern. From that point on, powerful and steady growth. We are deeply prayerful with all of our resources, and the size of the debt forgiveness that I can tell you about. Like I said, I don't even know how to talk about it, but a pattern transcended forever, and untold riches experienced as a result. Different this time, because I heard differently. I responded differently to the quantum possibility of life. Every ounce of fear that had ever existed vanished. Every behavioral habit that I had that would reinforce that old pattern just went. And all I know is that something that couldn't be transcended has been. A pattern that would never shift did. This level of grace is mystical, but available immediately. You see, the vulnerability in you is the possibility for total deliverance. The vulnerability in that purgatorial quantum state between has come to form, or has not yet come to form, and then has come to form, the vulnerability in that state is your possibility for total deliverance. That's the access point to quantum possibility. The humility that you live in as an ascending master on the planet gives you access to that vulnerability. And there's the keys to the kingdom. So as you can imagine, pelicans have become very dear to me. I love pelicans. And just this weekend, my husband manifested an absolutely enormous, beautiful painting of a pelican by a local artist, which now graces our place. And just out of the blue, this manifestation that has brought me a lovely pelican into the living room. So that is the moral of the story, that humility and vulnerability, in their subtle difference between one another, get these two dynamics right in your frame of consciousness, and you will dissolve the edges of that comfort zone that prevents you from experiencing the true glory of the truth expansion. Your vulnerability is the key to the kingdom, and your humility is your access to that key. Got it? Let me look at the live streamers. No, let me look at the people on the call. Give me a nod or a thumbs up if you're live and you get it. Good, good, great work, guys. Okay, we're going to go deeper in the Oasis tomorrow. We're also going to practice last week's mindset protocol. We're going to apply it. We're going to put it into application in relation to humility and vulnerability. Really strengthen your sovereignty of consciousness here, so that you really can be free to be and free to act in your life. And we're also going to do a group attunement. So that means that we're going to heal together. We're going to find a particular dynamic that we can pass energetically through the group that's going to bring an attunement to all of us. Great. And Oasis members, you're also going to receive your assignments for the week as well. So that's going to help you keep your focus on how to practice, how to hold your energy and your enlightenment, so that you are so that you're in the kingdom, so that you're living the good life and harvesting. Great work, everybody. Now we say goodbye to the live streamers on Facebook, and we take questions from those who are on the live call. So goodbye to everyone on Facebook. It's great to have you. And that now I think that means